It was just another heavy, sun-stained morning in Los Angeles, the kind where the light felt too bright, too close, and the pavement breathed heat back at your feet. Inside the small, time-worn Sunrise Diner on Melrose Avenue, the AC struggled to hold its ground, whispering out cold air that barely touched the sweat on your skin. But Emily Torres, 28 years old and already 3 shifts deep without rest, moved between tables like it was second nature. Maybe it was. Maybe tired had long ago become a place she lived in rather than a passing state. She tied her apron tighter as she refilled the sugar caddies. Her hands were rough, not from age, but from overuse. Her black sneakers were worn down at the heels, and her name tag had a crack across the T. But her eyes, dark, focused, quietly observing, still held something soft. She greeted customers with practiced ease. "Morning, how are you? Coffee coming right up. Can I get you started with anything?" Her voice was gentle but efficient, no frills, no time for them. Behind the counter, the old radio played 80s hits. The cook shouted orders through the pass-through window. The air smelled of burnt toast and frying bacon. It was nothing glamorous, but it was hers, a job she'd held onto like a lifeline through the storms of the last few years. Emily was a single mother to a 6-year-old girl named Lila. Her daughter had asthma, the chronic kind, the kind that made nights long and visits to the ER terrifying. Emily's shifts paid just enough to keep them fed and housed, barely. Her rent had gone up again. The health insurance lapsed last week. The landlord gave her until Friday. Her car, a beat-up Corolla with over 200,000 miles, had started making that awful knocking noise again. She didn't have the money for repairs. She didn't have the time to panic. And yet, she kept going. What choice did she have? She told herself every day that this was just a chapter, just the middle, not the end. That someday it would get better. That Lila would look back and know her mother fought for them both with everything she had. She didn't tell anyone how hard it was. Not the manager, not her co-workers, not even the sweet old couple who tipped her in quarters and Bible verses. Pride can be a quiet prison, and Emily had made her cell comfortable. At 10:37 a.m., the diner's door jingled again, that soft chime that had become the rhythm of her day. She turned from the counter and saw a man walk in, alone, wearing a dark hoodie, a baseball cap pulled low, and large sunglasses. He moved like someone used to avoiding attention. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. He chose a booth in the far corner, near the window, away from everyone else. Emily picked up her notepad and made her way over. "Good morning," she said with a smile, her pen poised. "What can I get started for you?" The man's voice, when he spoke, was calm and unassuming, warm even. "Coffee, please, black, and rice with garlic, fried fish if you have it, and some scrambled eggs." Emily blinked. It wasn't a typical order, not for breakfast, but it wasn't unfamiliar either. "We do," she said, surprised. "It's not on the menu, but yeah, we've got it." He nodded, removed his sunglasses, and that's when it hit her. The face beneath the cap was unmistakable, a little older than the posters she remembered, a bit more lined, more grounded. But those eyes, sharp, humble, kind, hadn't changed. She'd seen them 100 times on her father's old TV, on fight nights when the house filled with cousins, and her dad yelled at the screen in Tagalog, cheering, praying, screaming, "Manny Pacquiao." She froze, just a beat too long. Then she blinked and nodded, like nothing had happened. Her body remembered how to work before her mind could react. "I'll be right back with your coffee," she said. She turned quickly, walking back toward the kitchen, her breath shallow. Was it really him, sitting there, alone, in her section? Emily set the coffee cup down on the counter with shaking hands. She didn't tell anyone. Something in her said not to. Not yet. She poured the coffee carefully, placed it on a tray, and returned to the booth. He smiled when she approached. "Thank you." "You're welcome." As she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder once. He had his hands clasped, eyes down, silently saying grace before the food arrived. It made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She delivered his order 10 minutes later. The smell of garlic rice rose with the steam. When she set the plate down, he looked up and gave her a smile that didn't belong to a superstar. It belonged to a man who knew struggle who remembered hunger. "Looks perfect," he said. "I hope it tastes like home," she answered, surprising herself. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're Filipina?" "Half," she said. "My parents are from Cebu. I was born here." He nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away with respect. "Cebu, that's good people. Strong faith." Emily nodded. "And strong garlic." He laughed softly, and it felt like sunlight cutting through fog. She smiled before she could stop herself. There was a pause, one of those gentle human pauses where silence doesn't feel empty. She didn't want to overstep, but he didn't seem in a rush. So she asked tentatively, "Do you come here often?" "Not really," he said. "I like to stop by when I can. Quiet places, real food. Reminds me of where I started." She looked at him then, not as the fighter, not as the icon, but as a man. A man who'd grown up in poverty, who'd fought his way through life with fists and prayer. Someone who had known what it meant to have nothing. He picked up his fork and started eating. He took his time. Every bite seemed deliberate, like a ritual, like gratitude. Emily moved to other tables, refilled drinks, cleared plates, but her eyes kept drifting back to the booth in the corner. There was something else, something unspoken but deeply understood, an invisible thread between them. Maybe it was the shared culture, or the memory of a father's pride. Or maybe it was just that Emily had lived so long unseen that being noticed even briefly felt revolutionary. He finished his meal quietly, left only a few grains of rice on the plate. Then he sipped his coffee slowly, watching the world through the window. When he stood to leave, he pulled out a small envelope from his coat pocket and slid it under the salt shaker. He adjusted his cap, nodded politely at her from across the room, and walked out without fanfare. The door chimed again, and just like that he was gone. Emily walked over, thinking maybe he'd left a note. A thank you, a generous tip maybe. Her hands still smelled like coffee grounds and sanitizer. Her heart was beating oddly fast. She picked up the envelope. It was thicker than it should have been. Emily held the envelope in her hands for a long moment, not daring to open it just yet. Her fingers brushed over its surface like it might disappear. It wasn't heavy enough to feel suspicious, but it wasn't light either. There was something about it, the deliberate way it had been placed under the salt shaker, not tossed on the table or left in a hurry, that made her pause. She looked out the window, half expecting to still see him walking away, to wave or to nod goodbye again. But Manny Pacquiao was gone, vanished back into the anonymity he had chosen when he stepped into her world that morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she peeled open the flap. Inside there was no receipt, no credit card slip, no business card, just a small stack of bills, crisp, clean, neatly folded hundreds, and a note written on a plain white piece of paper, the ink slightly smudged in one corner as if he'd written it quickly. Maybe in his car, maybe while sitting at that very booth. "You served me with grace and dignity. No fanfare, no recognition, no expectations. That kind of kindness is rare. Please accept this as a small way to honor your strength. May God continue to guide you and your daughter." "Manny." Emily stared at the words, unblinking. Her mind couldn't quite catch up to what her eyes were telling her. She counted the money, not because she didn't believe it, but because her hands needed to do something, anything, to ground her. 10, 20, 30. It didn't stop. When she reached the final bill, she'd counted $10,000. She nearly dropped it. Her breath caught, sharp in her chest. For a split second, the diner disappeared around her. The clatter of dishes, the hum of the fridge, the scrape of a chair, all drowned in a quiet, crushing wave of disbelief. She stepped backward, one hand to her mouth. The envelope clutched tight to her chest like it might be snatched away. Tears came before she could stop them. Hot, sudden, uncontrollable. Not pretty tears, not cinematic, raw ones. The kind that pour out not from sadness or even joy, but from the release of something that has been carried too long. All the pressure, the silence, the quiet battles fought in grocery store aisles, hospital waiting rooms, broken down cars and dark bedrooms. It all cracked open in that moment. Her knees buckled slightly, and she sank into the empty booth beside the one he'd occupied, pressing the envelope to her chest. A fellow waitress named Carla noticed her and rushed over. "Emily, hey, what's wrong?" Emily shook her head, unable to speak. Carla slid into the booth, panicked for a moment, thinking something awful had happened. "What is it? Are you okay?" Emily handed her the note first, then the envelope. Carla read the note twice, then looked down at the cash. Her jaw dropped. "No way," she whispered. "No freaking way." Emily just nodded, still trembling. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carla whispered, "Was that really?" Emily wiped her face and gave the faintest smile. "Yeah. Manny Pacquiao." Carla looked around, as if trying to summon his presence back into the room. "And he just gave you this?" Emily laughed through her tears. "I didn't even say I recognized him. I didn't ask for anything. He just left it." Carla shook her head slowly. "Girl, this is a miracle. It wasn't just about the money. Yes, $10,000 could change things. It could clear debts, repair her car, get her daughter back on insurance. It meant food security for months. It meant a breath of air in a life that had been underwater for too long. But what undid Emily wasn't the financial relief. It was the recognition. She had been invisible for so long. Not ignored exactly. Customers were polite enough, but no one saw her. No one knew what she carried behind that smile, how many nights she spent calculating groceries against gas, or praying she could make it to payday without another emergency. But he saw her, not just because they shared a culture or because he noticed her grace under pressure. He saw her in a way that felt divine, quiet, undeniable. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Carla and the manager insisted she take a break, but Emily somehow wanted to keep working. She needed to move, to channel the trembling into something steady. With the envelope tucked into her locker, she returned to her tables with a surreal lightness, as though walking through a dream that hadn't fully formed yet. Word spread quietly among the staff, and for once there was no jealousy, just awe, just the sense that something holy had occurred in their corner of the world. Later that night, after her shift ended and Lila was asleep in the back seat of her car, Emily sat in the driver's seat with the envelope resting beside her. She watched her daughter breathe, her small chest rising and falling steadily. She hadn't cried since the moment at the diner, but now the tears returned, gentler this time, like a tide rather than a storm. She whispered aloud to no one, and maybe to God, "Why me?" And somewhere deep inside her the answer echoed back, "Because you kept going. Because you gave when you had nothing. Because someone saw you." In the days that followed, the moment stayed with her. She kept the note folded in her wallet, behind the only photo she had of her parents. She didn't tell her friends or post about it. She turned down the customer who asked if she'd gotten his autograph. She didn't want it to be a story about celebrity. She wanted it to remain about compassion. She used the money first for Lila, reinstated her health insurance, bought the medications she needed, scheduled appointments that had been long postponed. She repaired her car, bought groceries in bulk for the first time in months and paid off the overdue rent, with enough left to carry them into next month without the usual panic. But she also did something else. She gave back. She started tipping other workers more generously. The gas station attendant who worked nights, the young cashier who clearly hadn't eaten that day. She bought food for a homeless man outside the pharmacy and sat with him while he ate. It wasn't about balancing a scale. It was about continuing the chain that had begun in that booth at the Sunrise Diner. And still, she kept thinking about that conversation. Brief, soft-spoken, but so full of weight. How he hadn't talked about boxing or fame or success. He'd asked her where she was from. He'd talked about garlic rice and faith. He hadn't tried to inspire her. He just listened. And somehow, that had been enough to change her entire world. Months passed. The morning Manny Pacquiao walked into the Sunrise Diner became a private landmark in Emily's life. Not a date she celebrated, but one she carried inside her like a folded prayer. She never forgot the moment he looked her in the eye and thanked her like she mattered. And the envelope became more than just a gift. It was a door. It didn't just help her survive, it helped her remember how to move forward. After settling her debts and stabilizing her home life, Emily made a decision she had been postponing for years. She enrolled in night classes at the community college. She had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, before pregnancy and bills and exhaustion buried that hope. But now somehow it no longer felt impossible. Her schedule was brutal, waitressing during the day, classes at night, parenting always. But it was the kind of exhaustion that carried meaning. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just working to avoid drowning, she was swimming towards something. The money hadn't changed her character. If anything, it sharpened it. She began finding small ways to give others the kind of grace she'd been given. One evening, she noticed a teenage boy nervously counting coins at the counter, trying to afford a sandwich. She covered it without a word. Another night, she left a $100 tip at a nearby diner where she and Lila had gone for pancakes. The waitress chased after her, confused. Emily smiled and said only, "I've been there." She didn't tell people her story. It wasn't something she wanted to go viral, but she couldn't stop living differently. Every person who crossed her path now looked a little more like a soul in need of kindness. It didn't take $10,000 to see that. It just took awareness. It took remembering what it felt like to be invisible until someone chose to look closer. Her relationship with Lila blossomed too. The weight that had always hung between them, stress, fatigue, a kind of tight-lipped urgency, loosened. Emily had more time to sit with her daughter, to listen to her stories from school, to breathe while brushing her hair at night. They had dinners with vegetables and electricity that stayed on without warnings. They laughed more. They went for walks. They started to heal. And always, there was that small folded note in her wallet. She never showed it off, but sometimes late at night, she'd take it out just to read the words again. "You served me with grace and dignity." It wasn't the money that echoed in her. It was those words, because they reminded her that even in her smallest actions, she had worth. One afternoon, about 10 months after that day, she received an email from the local Filipino community center in San Diego. They were hosting a cultural celebration weekend: food, music, faith, family. It wasn't something she'd normally attend. Time and travel were still luxuries. But her professor at the college had nominated her for a small community service recognition, and the center wanted to honor her. She hesitated at first. Recognition made her uncomfortable, but something in her said yes. So she took a weekend off work, her first in years, and drove to San Diego with Lila. The celebration was vibrant, full of familiar smells and accents that reminded her of childhood visits to her grandmother's house. There was karaoke, dancing, lumpia, and pancit and sinigang. For the first time in a long while, she felt surrounded by her roots, not just culturally but spiritually. These were her people. The recognition ceremony was modest. Her name was called, she was handed a small plaque and a bouquet of flowers. She smiled politely, embarrassed by the applause, but Lila beamed beside her, clutching her hand. Later that evening, a hush fell over the crowd as a guest speaker was introduced. The announcer's voice rang out, proud and reverent. "Please welcome, all the way from General Santos City, 8th Division World Champion, Humanitarian, and our kababayan, Mr. Manny Pacquiao." Gasps filled the room. Applause thundered. People stood, phones lifted. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. He stepped onto the stage with the same humility he'd walked into her diner with. He wore a simple barong and spoke softly, his English measured, his voice full of warmth. He spoke not of championships or victories, but of faith, perseverance, and service. "I have lost fights in the ring," he said, "but never in spirit. You only truly lose when you stop believing you were born for more. We all come from something hard. What matters is how we carry it, and how we lift others with us." Emily listened, transfixed. He hadn't changed. Not even here, in front of hundreds of adoring fans, did he speak from pride. He spoke from gratitude. After his speech, there was a line for autographs and photos. Emily didn't plan to wait. She didn't need anything more from him, but Lila tugged at her sleeve, eyes wide. "Mommy, can we meet him?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." The line was long, and by the time they reached the front, Manny looked a little tired, but his smile never faded. When Emily stepped forward with Lila at her side, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just something deeper. He reached out to shake her hand. She returned it. "Thank you for being here," he said. Emily met his gaze and smiled. "I don't expect you to remember," she said softly, "but you came into the Sunrise Diner almost a year ago. You sat in the back, ordered rice and garlic and fish. I was your waitress." There was a beat, then his face changed. Subtle, not dramatic, but unmistakable. His smile deepened, gentler now. "You remember me," she said, her voice cracking. He nodded slowly. "I do." They stood there, two people linked by a quiet moment the world had never seen but that neither of them would forget. He looked at her daughter, then back at her. "You look well," he said. "We are," she said. "Thanks to you." He shook his head gently. "No. You were already strong. I just gave you a push." Emily felt tears rise again, but this time they didn't fall. She just nodded. "God bless you," he said. "You already did," she whispered. They took a photo. Simple, unposed, real. She didn't post it anywhere. It wasn't for the internet, it was for her, for Lila, for the part of her that once believed she'd never get back up. After that night, life didn't magically become easy. The bills still came. The nights were still long. Nursing school was hard. Lila still had bad asthma days, but Emily had something she didn't before. Momentum. A reason to believe that things could be better and that she had the power to help others believe it too. She kept waitressing as long as she could, then moved into part-time clinic work as her studies advanced. Eventually she became a licensed nurse, not a headline story, not a viral inspiration, just a woman who kept showing up, just someone who had once been seen. Years later, when Lila was a teenager, she found the note in her mother's wallet and asked who had written it. Emily smiled and said, "Someone who reminded me that grace matters." That envelope had long been emptied, the money long spent. But the words were still full, still enough. And in the end, that was the real gift. Someone had seen her, and now she saw everyone.